They train you to stand still while the world falls apart. Not metaphorically, literally. Chin level, shoulders square, eyes fixed on a point 3 feet above the average human head. While tourists shout, while pigeons land on your bearskin, while the man beside you locks his knees too hard and goes down like a felled oak at trooping the color, and you do not flinch, do not look, do not acknowledge that a colleague just hit ceremonial gravel at your 11 o'clock. They train you to be architecture. What they do not train you for, what no regiment, no Purbright drill square, no 4 a.m. road march through the Surrey Hills prepares you for, is the morning they hand you a folded program with a date on it, and a name you've been guarding for 11 years, and the name is in the past tense now, and your job is to stand perfectly still while an entire nation comes apart at the seams around you. I watched 37 men do it. 37 household division soldiers, bearskins and bayonets, and the whole ancestral theater of British military grief, stationed along the processional route from the palace to the abbey while the gun carriage moved at the pace of a held breath, and the silence. God, the silence was the loudest thing I have ever stood inside. Not quiet. Silence. The kind that has mass. The kind you can feel pressing against your sternum. I was not supposed to be there. I am a logistics officer, not a ceremonial one. I count things. Bullet inventories, ration schedules, the precise number of minutes it takes a 6-man section to clear a corridor in the East Wing. I'm not built for ceremony. I fidget. I have always fidgeted. A pen cap clicked against my thumbnail, a bootlace rewound, something small and repetitive that my hands do when my brain is working harder than my face is allowed to show. But Commander Alderton had pulled a hamstring at the rehearsal 2 days prior, and someone had to shadow the route, and I was the only officer in the building who already knew the ground plan. So I stood there, clicking my pen cap, watching Sergeant Daniel Howe stand at attention on the corner of the mall like he'd been grown there, like the Portland Stone had simply decided one afternoon to take the shape of a man in scarlet and gold. And I thought, he knew her. Not the way the nation knew her. The way you know someone when you've watched them every Tuesday for a decade. When you know the specific sound of their footstep in a corridor. When you've stood outside a door long enough to learn the rhythm of a life without ever being invited inside it. He knew her, and he was standing so still. That's when I started writing things down. Not orders, not logistics. Things. The way Private Carver's jaw moved like he was chewing the inside of his cheek. The way the autumn light hit the gold braid on the coffin bearer's shoulders and made it look almost obscene in its beauty. The way the crowd, 3 rows deep on the barrier, made no sound. Not one child, not one phone, as if grief had performed some temporary miracle on human behavior. I wrote it all down because I didn't know what else to do with it. What follows is what I found when I went back and read what I'd written. 2 days, 37 men. One institution trying to bury a person with the same precision and control it had used to protect her while she lived. What I didn't expect, what I still don't entirely know how to carry, is what it cost them to do it that way. Still, straight-backed, not a single crack in the surface. Until there was. The briefing came at 0400. Not unusual. Most things that matter come before the world is properly awake, before the institution has had time to arrange its face. I was already in my desk in the coordination room, a converted antechamber off the east corridor that smelled permanently of old paper and the particular mildew specific to buildings that have been important for too long. Clicking my pen cap and staring at a route map I'd already memorized 3 times over. The map wasn't the problem. I knew the map. Buckingham Palace to the Abbey, distance precisely 1.3 miles, processional pace 75 beats per minute to match the Grenadier Guard's slow march, 23 ceremonial positions along the route, each one requiring a man who could disappear into his uniform and stay disappeared for the better part of 4 hours regardless of what his body or his heart decided to do in the interim. The problem was Sergeant Daniel Howe. Specifically, Sergeant Daniel Howe's file, which had landed on my desk at 0347 with a yellow sticky note from Commander Alderton that said only watch him. I do not typically receive files with yellow sticky notes. Yellow sticky notes are the commander's shorthand for something he doesn't want documented, which means it's something that matters more than documentation can hold. I read the file twice. Then I read it a third time with my pen cap clicking against my thumbnail at a rate my therapist, were I to have one, would describe as elevated. 11 years. How I'd been assigned to the household division's close protection ceremonial detail for 11 years. Prior to that, for operational tours, 2 of them places I'm not permitted to name in written records, 1 commendation, 1 disciplinary note that had been subsequently expunged in a manner that told you more about the man's value to the regiment than the commendation did. He was 41. He was, by every metric my logistics brain understood, a machine built for precision under pressure. He had also, according to a note attached to the back of his file in Commander Alderton's handwriting, requested 3 times in the 6 weeks since the announcement to be reassigned from the ceremonial detail. 3 times. Denied, denied, denied. The regiment needs continuity, the denials said. The regiment needs men the cameras have learned to trust. The regiment needs the face it has always shown. What the denials didn't say, what they couldn't say was, we need someone who knew her to stand there because it dignifies the whole thing, and we know it costs you, and we're asking anyway. I pocketed the file at 0420, put on my dress uniform, badly because I'm not ceremonially trained and the buttons on my tunic are always fractionally misaligned in a way that makes the senior NCOs twitch, and went to find how. I found him in the armory, not maintaining kit. That would have been normal, comprehensible, something you could log. He was sitting on the bench in front of his locker with his bearskin in his hands, and he was doing nothing with it, just holding it. Both hands, one at each side like something that needed steadying. The armory smelled of bluebell polish and the specific cold metal scent of weapons that have been cleaned so many times they've gone past clean into something more like ceremony themselves. The strip lighting flickered, as it always does at that hour, because the East Wing's electrical systems are held together by institutional habit and the maintenance team's optimism. I said, Sergeant Howe. He looked up. His face was the face the regiment had trained him to wear, composed, level, professionally absent of anything that could be photographed and misread. But there's a thing that happens around the eyes when a face is working too hard to do nothing, a particular tension in the orbicularis that no amount of Pirbright drilling ever fully eliminates, and I saw it. I'm a logistics man. I notice things. Sir, he stood. The bearskin went under his arm with the automatic precision of 11 years. Sit down, I said, which surprised him because officers visiting armories at 0420 do not typically invite sitting. I'm not here about the kit. He sat, slowly, like a man who'd been expecting a different kind of conversation and had to rearrange his interior furniture before he could be present for this one. I sat across from him on the adjacent bench, which put me 6 inches lower than I'd have liked, and put the flickering strip light directly behind his head in a way that made the whole scene feel like a deposition. I clicked my pen cap twice. Stopped myself. You've requested reassignment 3 times, I said. A pause, long enough to mean something. Denied 3 times, he said. Yes. Then, we're not discussing reassignment. No. Another pause. Outside in the corridor, the building was beginning its pre-dawn organization. Boots on stone, voices at the register of men who haven't yet committed to waking up, the distant clatter of something heavy in the loading bay. The palace in the hours before ceremony sounds like a theater before the house lights go down. All backstage urgency and front-of-house silence. I knew her Tuesday walk, House said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the middle distance that well-trained soldiers find when they need somewhere to put their eyes that isn't the face in front of them. Every Tuesday, 9:15, she'd come through the visitor's entrance from the garden side. Not the state entrance. The garden side. She said he stopped. Started again. She used to say the state entrance felt like being announced when she just wanted to come home. I didn't write anything down. I had my notebook in my chest pocket and my pen in my hand, and I did not write anything down, which tells you more about that moment than anything I could have logged. She had a specific step, House said. Left foot slightly heavier. You could hear it. 9:15 on the stone, every Tuesday, her particular walk. The strip light flickered. I've been standing in that corridor for 11 years, he said. and I'm going to stand on the mall today, and the gun carriage is going to pass at 75 beats per minute, and I'm going to do my job, and I'm going to be every single thing the regiment needs me to be. I know, I said. I just needed someone to know that I know what I'm losing. He was first in position at 0730. I know because I logged it. Old habit. Fingers found the notebook before my brain had authorized the action. Corner of the mall and Marlborough Road, ceremonial position 7. One of the longest exposed sections of the route where the crowd would be thickest and the duration of standing unavoidable. The crowd was already 4 deep on the barriers. In the 6 years I've been working this building, I've attended 12 state functions for garden parties and one extremely tense diplomatic dinner that I'm still not permitted to discuss. And I have never seen a crowd with this specific quality of quiet. Not subdued, not sad. Something more collective than that. Some atmosphere that a crowd assembles when it has agreed, without discussion, to honor something larger than any individual present. The light was early autumn clear. Cold enough for your breath to show. The kind of morning that makes stone buildings look more permanent than they already are, which at Buckingham Palace is genuinely saying something. I took my position 20 feet behind Howe, slightly to the right, nominally observing the processional alignment, but actually, and this is not something I will include in any formal record, watching him. Commander Alderton had said to watch him. I was watching him. He stood the way he always stood, weight slightly forward on the balls of his feet, the bearskin adding 7 inches he didn't need, the scarlet of his tunic so bright in the autumn light, it seemed almost aggressive. His face was already arranged. The professional absence was in place. But his left hand, I noticed his left hand, 3 fingers tight against his thigh, then released, then tight again. 3 fingers press and release, press and release, a rhythm so small and contained it wouldn't register on camera, wouldn't register to anyone who wasn't standing close enough, and looking for exactly the kind of thing you're not supposed to show. I clicked my pen cap. We were both in our way, keeping time. The gun carriage entered the mall at 10:47. I know the precise moment because I was logging everything, pace, crowd reaction, wind direction, the specific quality of sound as the Grenadier Guard's slow march came around the corner, and the crowd noise dropped from murmur to nothing in approximately 4 seconds. For seconds, for an entire assembled mass of human beings to decide, collectively, and without instruction, to be silent. The carriage moved. How to not move? This is the thing about ceremonial soldiers that civilians never quite credit. The discipline required to do nothing is not passive. It is the most active thing a body can perform. Every instinct, physical, emotional, gravitational, works against the stillness. Your knees lock and then ache and then go past aching into something more like philosophical resignation. Your back tightens in increments you can measure, but not address. Your eyes dry out because you've been trained not to blink at a rate that looks human. And underneath all of it, all the physical negotiation with your own body, you are also doing something else. You are watching through the edges of your perfectly forward fixed gaze, everything. The carriage was smaller than a nod. Something that wasn't for the crowd, or the cameras, or the regiment. Something that was, I can only call it what it was, a goodbye. Private, contained, architectural in its restraint. The crowd around me didn't see it. I saw it. I clicked my pen cap 4 times in a row and stopped and looked at my notebook and found that I had been writing the same word for the past 30 seconds in the corner of the page, over and over in smaller and smaller letters until it was almost too small to read. Tuesday, 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 Tuesday. The route cleared at 13:22. The regiment's after-action debrief was at 1400 hours in the coordination room. I attended. I took notes. I recorded arrival times, positional adherence, crowd management metrics, the 7 instances of civilian barrier breach, all minor, all managed, the 3 ceremonial timing deviations that fell within acceptable parameters, and the one that didn't and would need to go in the formal report. I did not record what I'd seen on the mall. Commander Alderton sat at the head of the table with his hamstring injury, making him list slightly to the left in a way he was working hard not to show, and He went through the debrief with the systematic precision of a man who has processed institutional grief through operational efficiency for long enough that he stopped noticing the methodology. Hal was in the room, third seat on the right. His face was the face it always was in these rooms, present, level, professionally ready for whatever needed doing. His bearskin was off. You don't wear the bearskin indoors, not in working hours, and without it he looked very briefly like a man instead of an institution, which I found I was unprepared for. At the end of the debrief, Alderton asked for any observations. Standard procedure. Most people don't offer any. Most people are tired and want tea and want to go somewhere private with whatever the day has deposited in them. Hal raised his hand. Not a dramatic gesture. The regulation raise. Elbow level, 2 fingers, quiet indication that there's something to say. Alderton nodded. I'd like to recommend, Hal said, that for future ceremonial duties of this nature, we build a formal transition period into the preparation schedule. Not longer rehearsal. A different kind of preparation. Time to, he stopped. Chose the next word with visible care. Contextualize. A pause around the table. The kind of pause that happens when a soldier says something true in a room where truth is not typically the operational format. Contextualize, Alderton repeated. Yes, sir. Define that. Hal looked at his hands on the table. Then, back up. Time to acknowledge what we're actually being asked to carry. Before we're asked to carry it in public. The room was very quiet. Alderton wrote something in his notebook. I couldn't see what. He doesn't use sticky notes in the debrief. Sticky notes are private communication. Debrief notes are institutional record. So whatever he wrote would end up in the formal minutes, which meant it would exist somewhere officially, which felt important. Noted, Alderton said, the debrief ended. I stayed at my desk until 1900. The coordination room was empty by 1600. The palace settles quickly after ceremony. There's always a faint deflation, a sense of the building breathing out, of all the held-tight energy releasing into the particular quiet of corridors that have been walked by a great many people and are now walked by none. I was writing, not the formal report, that was done and filed by 1530, properly formatted, all 7 barrier breaches accounted for, all timing deviations categorized. This was the other thing. The thing I'd started on them all with my pen cap clicking and Tuesday written smaller and smaller in the corner of a notebook page. I wrote down the armory, the bearskin held in both hands, the flickering strip light. I wrote down 3 fingers pressing against a thigh and releasing. I wrote down a chin moving 1 millimeter, perhaps 2, as a gun carriage passed. I wrote down what it looked like when a man says goodbye to someone in the only language his profession allows him. Still, straight, present, contained, and entirely private in a crowd of 6,000 people. At 1843, my pen cap fell off. Just fell. Worn through, I suppose, though I hadn't noticed it wearing. The cap that I've been clicking against my thumbnail for 11 hours of the longest Tuesday this building has seen in a decade, and it fell off and bounced under the desk, and I had to get down on my knees on the cold stone floor of the coordination room to find it, which is not a dignified position for a logistics officer in dress uniform. And while I was down there with my cheek near the floor and my fingers finding the cap in the dust and the dark, I thought about the word contextualize and why it had made a room full of soldiers go quiet. Because it was the only official word any of them had been given in the whole of the preparation and all the drills and route walks and timing rehearsals to describe the thing they were all actually being asked to do. Feel something while standing still, while the cameras ran, while the nation watched. I found a pen cap. I put it back on. I went back to my desk and I kept writing because I didn't know what else to do with the day. And because the man in the armory at 0420 had said, I just needed someone to know that I know what I'm losing. And I thought, maybe that's what this is. Maybe I'm just someone who knows. At 1900, I locked up the coordination room and walked the east corridor toward the car park. The building was quiet the way it only gets after something irreversible. I passed position 7 of the processional route, the corner of the mall and Marlborough Road, where Hal had stood for 4 hours and 11 minutes on my way through the palace grounds, which is not technically on my route to the car park, but I took it anyway, logistics man that I am, logging the detail without meaning to. The crowd barriers were still up. They'd be removed in the morning. For now, they stood in the empty street with the autumn dark settling around them, still holding the shape of the crowd that had stood behind them, still oriented toward a route where nothing was moving anymore. I stopped at the corner. I stood there for a moment in my slightly misaligned tunic buttons and my recovered pen cap in the precise position where I'd spent the day watching a man perform the most controlled form of grief I've ever witnessed. The street was empty. The Tuesday quiet was everywhere. I clicked my pen cap once, which was habit, and then I put the pen in my pocket, which was a choice, and I stood there for a moment doing nothing, which was, I think, the most honest thing I did all day. Into part one, nobody tells you about the morning after. Every directive, every briefing document, every color-coded route map, and positional checklist I had produced over the preceding 6 weeks was oriented toward a single point in time: the processional, the ceremony, the thing that would be broadcast, archived, reviewed by military historians and media analysts and palace communications teams for the next 40 years. No one had produced a document for the morning after. I arrived at the coordination room at 0610 to find Private Aaron Carver sitting on the floor outside the locked door with his back against the wall and his kit bag between his knees and what appeared to be an extremely old and extremely well-handled copy of a paperback novel open across his thigh, though he wasn't reading it. He was looking at the door in the manner of a man who has been looking at the door for long enough that the door has stopped being something he sees and started being something he just faces. He was 23. I knew this because I had all their files. 23, 3 years in the regiment, second-generation household division. His father had served, which is either an inheritance or a weight, depending on the day, and he had been stationed at position 14 yesterday, which put him directly outside the Abbey entrance for the duration of the service. 3 hours and 51 minutes of standing while the world did its grief inside a building, and he stood outside in the cold and stayed architecture. He saw me, stood up immediately. The book went into the kit bag with the practiced sleight of hand of a young soldier who has been caught not being military before and has learned the transition. Sir, the room was locked and I didn't want to sit down, Carver. He sat, slower than Hal had sat the morning before, which told me he was less practiced in navigating conversations that weren't structured around rank and protocol. He held his kit bag on his lap like a shield, which he probably didn't know he was doing. I unlocked the door. Come in. He had a specific way of holding his jaw when he was working something through. I noted it yesterday on the route, the interior of the cheek chewing that I'd logged in my notebook as Carver, jaw tension, position 14, intermittent, up close in the coordination room's early morning light. It looked less like tension and more like a man trying to keep something inside his mouth that would embarrass him if it got out. I made tea. I am not a man who makes tea easily. My hands are better with a pen and a clipboard than a kettle, but the coordination room has an electric kettle and a selection of institutional-grade tea bags that have absorbed so much ambient stress over the years they're practically therapeutic by proximity, and I made 2 cups and put one in front of Carver and sat down across from him. He looked at the tea. There isn't a protocol for this, I said. I'm not logging this conversation. You came here for a reason. A long pause. He chewed his cheek. The strip light, different strip light, same institutional flicker, offered its usual ambiguous commentary. I saw something yesterday, he said. At position 14. Tell me, the princess, not the younger one, I mean, the one who came through the Abbey side entrance before the main party. He stopped. Restarted. She lost her shoe. I looked at him. On the Abbey steps, he said. The heel caught in the stone. She didn't go down or anything. She caught herself on the railing, but the shoe came off and it was there on the step, and she was in stocking feet on the Abbey steps, and there were cameras everywhere, but they were all oriented toward the main entrance because that's where the principal movement was, and she was on the side, and he stopped again. And I said, and she looked at me. The strip light flickered. She looked directly at me because I was the only person there. And He put his jaw through its interior exercise again. I'm not supposed to. I'm not supposed to. Break position, interact, initiate any contact outside of direct security protocol. I know all of that, sir. I know it. I wrote it in my own hand during training. But she was standing in stocking feet on the Abbey steps in front of her grandmother's coffin with a broken shoe, and she looked at me like he searched his kit bag, which meant he was looking for the right words rather than anything in the bag. She looked at me like I was the only other person in the world who knew where she was. I'll let the room be quiet for a moment. Outside in the corridor, the early morning palace sounds were beginning their routine. The distant catering staff, the security handover, the specific rumble of the service lift that I had identified in my first week as the building's heartbeat and never stopped associating with institutional continuity. What did you do? I asked. He unzipped his kit bag, reached in, put something on the table between us. A shoe, one heel, black. The sort of formal footwear that ceremonial occasions require. One side of the heel plate had come loose and was hanging at a 45-degree angle from the base. Expensive, or had been. Now it was a broken thing, formal in its damage. I stepped forward, he said. 2 steps. I picked it up. I held it out to her. He was looking at the shoe on the table. She took it. She put it back on. She had to hold the railing to do it, and the heel was still broken, so she couldn't put weight on it properly. And then she straightened up and she went inside. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. Pause. But before she went in, he said, "She did this." He made a gesture so small I almost didn't catch it. Both hands, briefly, pressing together at the fingers. Not quite a prayer position. Not quite anything with a name. Something between a bow and a held breath. "Like that," he said. "Yes," I said. "Is that? Am I going to be disciplined?" "Because I don't." He looked up at me. "I don't regret it. Sir, I want you to know that. I'm prepared to take whatever I don't regret it." I sat with his file for an hour. Not to build a case. Not to construct a report. I sat with it the way I'd sat with Hal's file the previous morning, which is to say I read it once for information and then sat there reading it a second time for what the information didn't say. Aaron James Carver, 23, second generation household division, 6 distinctions in his ceremonial training assessments, 1 informal commendation from the under-officer at Purbright, exceptional situational awareness, and instinctive appropriate response under non-standard conditions, which was bureaucratic language for he does the right thing when the protocol doesn't quite fit. 1 note in his file from a training exercise occasionally prioritizes human outcome over procedural adherence, which the training officer had flagged as a concern and I was now reading as a character reference. His father had served from 1989 to 2007, Falklands era and after. I didn't have the father's file, but I had served long enough in institutions that love procedural adherence to understand what that inheritance looked like in a son. You learn the protocols with your bones. You believed in them. And then, periodically, something happened that the protocols hadn't anticipated, and you had to decide in the 2 seconds between the event and your response what the protocol was actually for. Was it for the institution, or was it for the person? Carver had decided on the Abbey steps that was the same thing. I'm still not entirely sure he was wrong. At 0900, I was supposed to begin the formal post-event debrief documentation. 37 positional reports, 7 barrier breach accounts, the processional timing analysis, the communications log from the Joint Operations Room. Standard procedure. Expected on Commander Alderton's desk by 1700. I opened the first positional report template, stared at it. The template asked for time of arrival, time of departure, crowd density, security incidents, deviations from planned position. It did not ask for what it cost to stand there, what a guard carried home in the absence of a formal protocol for carrying it, what a young private saw on a side staircase that no camera would keep. I closed the template, opened a blank document, started writing something that was not, technically, in my job description. What I wrote: observations on ceremonial duty, close protection personnel, post-event period. Informal, not for formal record without written approval. The assumption embedded in all ceremonial preparation is that the difficulty is the performance, the timing, the position, the physical endurance. The preparation addresses all of these. What the preparation does not address is the relationship between the performer and the performed about. Household division personnel assigned to long-term protective duties develop through duration and proximity, through the Tuesday walks and the corridor sounds and the 11 years of specific footsteps, a form of knowledge about the principle that is not emotional attachment in any formal sense and is not professional distance in any honest sense. It is something in between that the institution has no language for, because the institution has not needed language for it until the principle is gone, and the person who held that in-between knowledge is required to stand at attention while the whole country learns what they already knew. This is not a criticism. It is an observation, recommendation. That future ceremonial preparation schedule for personnel with long-term protective assignments include a formal structured session. Call it contextualization, call it transition, call it whatever the institution can bear to call it, in which the in-between knowledge is acknowledged before it is asked to stand still. Secondary observation. Private Aaron Carver, position 14, broke position briefly during the Abbey arrival sequence to return a shoe. This incident is not in any camera footage. It is not in any formal record. It is, as far as institutional memory is concerned, a thing that did not happen. I am recording that it happened. I am recording that the response given in the 2 seconds between event and action was, in my assessment, the correct one. The protocols that govern ceremonial conduct exist to serve the institution's relationship with the principal. Carver served that relationship in the truest possible sense, which is to say, he saw a person where the protocol saw a position, and he responded accordingly. I leave it to others to determine whether this is a distinction worth making. I think it is. Commander Alderton read my informal document at 1400. He did not call me in to discuss it. He did not send a reply. He sent back the document with a single handwritten line at the bottom in the margin, in his characteristic dark blue ink that cost more than his rank should justify. But that is one of the small personal extravagances that institutional men allow themselves when everything else is standardized. Keep writing. 2 words. No elaboration. Commander Alderton, who has been navigating institutional communication for 32 years and therefore knows that some instructions lose their power in proportion to how fully they're explained. I kept writing. At 1500, Sergeant Howe appeared in the coordination room doorway. Not summoned, not scheduled. He knocked. 3 knocks, the NCO's knock, purposeful and not presumptuous, and waited for my nod before entering, and sat in the chair across from my desk in the manner of a man who has come to say something specific and is working out how to start it. I put my pen down, both hands flat on the desk, a thing my father taught me. He was also a logistics man, though for a different branch, and he had a theory that the quality of listening could be measured in what you stopped doing to do it. I looked at the map on the wall behind me, the route map from the processional, still up because I hadn't yet made the administrative decision to file it. I've been asked, he said, to lead the training cohort for next year's ceremonial intake. A pause. That's a substantial responsibility, I said. Yes. He looked at the map for another moment. Then at me. I accepted. I nodded. I wanted, he stopped. The jaw did nothing. No tension, no press, which meant he'd worked out what he wanted to say before he came in, and the tension was already resolved. I wanted to tell someone. That's all. I'm glad you did, I said. He stood. The motion was clean and complete in the way that military motion is when it's decided rather than performed. He put his hand briefly on the door frame as he left. Not leaning, not steadying, just touching. The gesture of a man acknowledging a room he's been in for the first time in an important way and won't visit the same way again. The door closed. I picked up my pen. At 1700, I filed the formal post-event report. 37 positions, 7 breach incidents, timing deviation analysis, communications log. All correct, all properly formatted, all exactly what the institution needed it to be. At 1701, I saved a second document that was not in the formal report. At 1800, I collected my pen cap from the desk, which I've been leaving there, I noticed, rather than in my pocket, which was a new thing I was doing without quite knowing when I'd started, and put my coat on and walked the east corridor. I passed the armory. I passed position 7. I walked through the garden's side entrance, the one she'd always used, left foot slightly heavier, 9:15 on a Tuesday, and stood in the garden in the late afternoon dark while the palace arranged itself around me the way very old buildings arrange themselves. Indifferently, permanently, with the total confidence of something that has been here longer than every concern you could name. The garden smelled of end-of-season roses and the specific damp of London in October and, faintly, the machine oil from the vehicles in the eastern courtyard. I stood there for a while. Carver's shoe was still on my desk in the coordination room. He'd left it there or forgotten it, and I'd left it there too. Neither of us had made the administrative decision to deal with it, which meant it was sitting on the logistics officer's desk in a palace coordination room, as though it had always belonged there, the broken heel hanging at its 45-degree angle, expensive in its damage, and entirely outside any formal protocol for being where it was. I thought about the gesture, both hands briefly at the fingers. Not quite a prayer, not quite a bow, something between. I thought about contextualize and keep writing and 3 knocks on a door frame and a chin moving 1 millimeter, perhaps 2. I thought about Tuesday. The garden was very quiet. Somewhere in the building behind me, a door opened and closed, and the sound moved through the garden entrance and passed over me and kept going, which is what sound does in very old buildings. It moves through rooms that have heard more than you can imagine and continues on regardless. I put my pen cap in my pocket. I went home. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing the next intake's training schedule when I found a new module. 45 minutes, slotted between ceremonial positioning and timing and closed protection protocol review. No author listed, just a title in the scheduling document in the standard institutional font. Context and continuity, understanding long-term protective assignments. I stared at it for a while. Then I opened a blank document and started drafting the content because someone needed to, and Commander Alderton had told me to keep writing, and because 45 minutes wasn't much, but it was something, and something is what you work with when the protocol doesn't quite cover the ground. I clicked my pen cap. The strip light flickered. Outside in the corridor, the building continued its Tuesday sounds. I wrote, "The difficulty is not the performance. The difficulty is what you carry into it." And then beneath that, uncertain whether it belonged in a formal training document, but putting it there anyway, "This is something worth knowing before you're asked to stand still." I don't know if the module will survive the next institutional review. Modules come and go. The regiment's documents are reviewed annually, and anything that can't be justified in operational language tends to get categorized as supplementary and then quietly removed. But how accepted the training cohort leadership? And Carver's broken shoe sat on my desk for 11 days before I returned it. Carefully packaged, no cover letter, no formal notation, just a shoe, to the Palace Communications office with a note that said only position 14, Abbey Steps, October 14th. I don't know what they did with it. I don't know if she ever knew who picked it up. I don't know, in the formal, institutional, post-event report sense, whether any of what I have written in the past 3 weeks counts as information the regiment needs to have. What I know is 37 men stood still for 4 hours and 11 minutes while the country processed a loss that most of them had already been carrying longer than the country knew. What I know is one of them broke position on a side staircase and did the right thing in 2 seconds with no protocol to guide him and no camera to record it. What I know is the institution asked for something it didn't have a word for, and a sergeant found a word for it, and an officer wrote it down, and a commander said keep writing. What I know is in the East Garden at the end of October, the roses that hadn't finished were still finishing, indifferent to everything, which is also a kind of continuity. The pen cap is wearing through again. I should buy a new pen. I keep not doing it. End of part 2.